On April 8, 2003, barely 18 days after the war had begun, US troops entered Baghdad. For years, the Iraqi people had suffered under a vicious and brutal dictator. In their anger, they turned on their former leader. But while hostile mobs looted hospitals and museums, the US troops turned a blind eye. They had orders to secure and hold other objectives.
Interesting that the first thing that they did was take over the oil fields, post guards around the oil ministry, and allow the hospitals and other things to be looted, which really didn't go down well. They didn't win the hearts and minds of the people.
By invading Iraq, Bush had seized all of its oil fields. Once they've been updated, production will increase to 3 million barrels a day, twice the 2002 levels. Some estimate that the final production will rise to 6 million barrels a day and threaten to undermine all other oil producers.
Well, if you think the alleged theft of the world's second largest oil reserves is shocking, then another conspiracy involving something called the PetroDollar will really blow you away.
For years, the mighty US dollar has ruled the world. But what if Saddam did actually have a weapon of mass destruction that would not only have threatened the position of the dollar, but American military might as well?
If the dollar loses its status as a world reserve currency, that is the pillar that underpins American supremacy, then the military pillar, which is the other pillar of American supremacy, will fall away as well.
With the Iraq War supposedly over and battle raging against insurgents and terrorists, accusations and conspiracy theories were hurled against the Bush administration. Throughout them all, the seizing of Iraq's oil was at the top of the list, even though the US and UK continued to deny it. But the price that the US is paying for its newfound black gold is reaching massive proportions. Even so, George Bush and his administration seem as confident as ever that it's a war worth fighting for, whatever the cost.
You know, I think it was bad investment because oil prices have doubled since the invasion, and yet we are spending $100 billion a year to stay in a country that it is basically close to anarchy. So what kind of improvement we have that? It's a bad investment.
Well, according to that theory, the war was all about oil and protecting expensive American lifestyles. But there's another theory that says the conspiracy goes much further than that, and that the war was actually about protecting the global supremacy of the US dollar. It should come as no surprise that the dollar is everything. The US dollar is the world's major currency. It accounts for approximately 2/3 of all the world's exchange reserves. Half the world's exports are done in dollars. All International Monetary Fund loans are made in dollars. And if you want to buy oil on the international market, the currency is the US dollar. But what would happen if some other currency threatened that position? With 12 countries already using it, and a further 15 waiting in the wings to convert to it, the euro is the fastest growing currency in the world. If the euro was to become the new international currency, the US might not take it lying down. I went to find Washington-based William Clark, an author and information analyst who believes that the conspiracy behind the Iraqi war is all about protecting the dollar.
In the early 40s, the State Department did tell the President of the United States that it looks like Middle East has more oil than the United States, and so we need, they call it the greatest strategic prize, I think, in world history.
Before this time, nearly all oil was produced by the US and sold for dollars. But by the 1970s, oil had been discovered around the world, and a cartel of 11 oil producers, OPEC, conceived a plan to sell their own oil in their own currencies. But the US had other ideas.
The United States intervened secretly in 1973 when OPEC was evaluating this proposal to say, please don't do that. And they were talking to Saudi Arabia, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and say, why don't you sell these in dollars only? And they were working closely with the British on this. And we will, it's sort of a quid pro quo, we will protect you, we will sell you military arms, we'll keep you in power, as long as you keep selling oil in dollars. Even the CIA didn't know about it at first, neither did Congress. But after the fact, it was a fait accompli, it was done. So ever since then, for the last 31 years, the dollars that OPEC gets flows back to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York.
That's where the problem lies. Since the agreement with OPEC, the Arab states have been controlling their own oil fields, but have still continued to sell their oil for US dollars. And where do the oil producers bank their dollars? America. It's called the PetroDollar cycle.
After the PetroDollar recycling system was implemented, 70% of Saudi Arabia's entire wealth was in one account in the Federal Reserve of New York. And that implemented a system where we kept the Saudis in power, they got rich, and we had an unlimited credit card.
And that's the dark side of the dollar conspiracy, and how America has been carving up the oil industry for years. It's not only the oil producers who have to sell in dollars. Buyers can only pay for oil in dollars as well. And if you don't have dollars, how do you get them? You exchange your goods and services for them. All America has to do is print them.
Japan wants to buy oil, so they make a Honda. They sell us the Honda. We give them that money, dollar bills. They take those dollar bills and they give them over to OPEC. OPEC gives them a barrel of oil. OPEC takes those dollar bills and they give them back to us in the Federal Reserve. So we print the money. It goes to our trade partners. They take some of that money. Some of that money goes to buy their oil, their monthly oil bill. Saudi Arabia then invests it right back in us. That's why it's called PetroDollar recycling.
As long as oil is traded in dollars and the US can print them for nothing, then it has its very own money tree. But what happens when the US cannot print those dollars fast enough to keep up with the huge amounts of imports it needs to survive? America is now importing more goods than it can pay for. So by continuing to print more and more dollars, its debt is reaching a dangerous all-time high. Even with petrodollars, it's still having to borrow from former enemies. Some believe that the once mighty dollar is now under threat. One such man, who cannot be identified, agreed to meet me at a secret address in a downtown New York hotel.
As a public servant, I'm prohibited from engaging in any political affairs, but I wanted to express my opinion about this very important subject. Just in the last year, 2005, the amount of foreign exchange reserves held by China has just exceeded the amount held by Japan. The amount of interest that was owed on previous debts of the United States is approaching $900 billion a year. China this year maybe has purchased roughly $200 billion of that. So if they stop buying, there might not be anybody to replace that $200 billion.
So perhaps it's this dependence on dollars, generated by oil, that was the reason the US went into Iraq. The whole US position in the world relies on the petrodollar. And if that should change, it could be a reason for a conspiracy to go to war.
If we had to play by the normal economic rules,